Hi, we're back. It's Harvey Hubbell Show and Tell, and I'm with Laura Stewart from the 95% group. Am I right? Hi, Laura. How
That's
are you?
exactly right. Hi, I'm good. How are you, Harvey?
I'm doing great. I appreciate you talking with us today, and I love the name 95% group. But what does it mean? Tell people. It's a great name, great concept.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for asking that. So we are an educational publishing company, and we offer both professional learning and we offer classroom resources in the area of literacy, primarily focusing on the foundational skills. And we base our approach on this body of research known as the science of reading and the instructional methodology that we refer to as structured literacy, explicit, systematic, sequential, cumulative instruction. So the founders of this company, Susan and David Hall, called it 95% group because we approach our work knowing that with evidence aligned instruction, at least 95% of our students can learn to read. And that really is, I call it our North Star. It kind of drives everything we do. We have a purpose statement as an organization. Our purpose is to unlock the power of literacy for every child. And we want to do that by building on the science, that body of evidence, to support and empower teachers. So we want to give our teachers knowledge and resources and support so that they can deliver on this promise that we all want to make, that all students will learn to read. So 95% is really 95% or more of our students can learn to read with evidence-aligned instruction.
Um, I probably a lot of people watching this know the numbers, and I made a film about this. But
Um,
how are we doing right now as a nation? I mean, I'm asking you a question we kind of know the answer for, but 95%. How come everybody's not doing it? What are we doing right now? How many people are reading at grade level? Pick a grade. Give me a statistic if you
yeah, I
know.
mean, yeah, we know essentially that about two-thirds of our students in fourth grade are not reading proficiently. And what I find really interesting is that the statistics are about the same for eighth grade. So intervention, identifying kids at risk and intervening between fourth and eighth grade doesn't appear to be having a good track record, right? So I think we have to think about what's happening. And again, yes, we have to intervene with those students who are struggling, but we also have to think about what's happening in the beginning. How can instruction impact our students to get better outcomes right from the start? And I think that what we're all moving toward, and I have been in education for a very long time, and I'm incredibly hopeful, is that we are starting to, or hopefully, starting to recognize that our profession can be aligned with evidence, that we can have a professional body of evidence that guides the work that we do. I came up as a teacher during the whole language years, and the thinking then was kind of, well, learning to read is like learning to speak. And if we just immerse kids in print and model for them what a good reader does, and let them explore books, that somehow, children will just acquire that ability. And we know now, of course, that's a very small percentage of people that actually can acquire reading in a seemingly effortless way. We still have to build those neural systems. And I think, what really was a watershed moment for me as a teacher that came up under some of those what are now known as misconceptions, is that, especially at the National Reading Panel, I came to this kind of watershed moment that there is evidence, there is a body of research from cognitive science and neuroscience that's always evolving, right? It's not static, it's dynamic, but that body of evidence can really inform our practice. And I think when you look at, schools or districts who are implementing instructional moves based on the science of reading and using aligned resources and giving teachers the supports that they need, professional learning that they need, that they are getting better outcomes. So I do not believe that we are relegated to continuing to have two-thirds of our kids who are going to not be proficient readers. I don't think it has to be that way.
Well, yeah, me too. And there is something happening now. There is
I
like
agree.
it's a perfect storm that's coming together right now. So
Hmm.
so with that, you started talking about your journey. I want to hear. You seem like a nice guy. You wanted to teach people how to read, right? I mean, so tell me about your journey. How did you get to where you are now? And I mean, we know that there's a perfect storm happening, and
Yeah.
you're riding this from balanced literacy, and so you did good in school. You before you were did you why did you want to become a teacher anyhow?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, yes, I was a good student, and I wanted to, I wanted, I guess because I was a good student, I wanted other people to be good students. I also have to give a shout out to my Uncle Luther, who was an amazing, intelligent, kind of brilliant guy who chose teaching, and so he was a bit of a role model for me. And so I was always intrigued with the idea of how do I help others, learn. That was always, important to me. I mean, I had, forays into different things like the fine arts and whatnot, but I really kind of always gravitated more back toward teaching. Like I mentioned, I came up in these whole language years when it was very much of constructivist approach, in the belief that, again, learning to read is fairly natural. Explicit instruction was only for kids who struggled. Like that was a belief, highly held belief. Another belief was that motivation had to come first, and that if we, drilled and killed kids with, lots of foundational skill work, that at the drill level, that somehow it would destroy their motivation to learn to read. Of course, over the years, I've learned that all of those are misconceptions, right? Instruction really matters. Motivation comes from incremental success that kids get by learning how to read and by us delivering on that promise. Explicit instruction is good for the vast majority of us, and it's imperative for many of us. So I had to come to a moment in my own career, where I had to kind of face that. I would say that the moment in my career where I really had to face that is I had a couple of big doubt moments. One, I was thinking, why are kids failing to learn to read? If they're cognitively capable, then we are failing them, right? They're not failing. We are failing them. I think the other thing that really hit me was I would have students who looked like readers, sounded like readers, in kindergarten, first, maybe into second grade, and then they just started, they started to fall off the cliff. And that was when I realized we were encouraging strategies in text that were not sustainable, right? Kids were developing habits that were not sustainable, and they weren't developing that neural system in order to be real readers, right? They were using pictures and they were using context. And you could even see this, could even see kids just kind of, searching all over the page instead of looking at the word. So those kinds of, doubts started really, kind of bothering me a lot. In the meantime, I went into administration, but that really wasn't my calling. So I really got into professional learning. And I will say one of the books that was really impactful for me was Marilyn Adams' Beginning to Read, Thinking and Learning About Print. That was a game changer for me because it sent me on a whole different path. And I began to be mentored by women who came before me that were really blazing a trail in what I would call now the science of reading movement. Of course, we called it during the reading first years, scientifically based reading research. So anyway, so I got involved in kind of really moving toward that. I was, as I mentioned, in professional learning, and I worked in the Reading First initiative in the state of Wisconsin. And I really saw firsthand what change could come through, A, following evidence-aligned instruction, but B, looking at data and using that data to guide us toward a relentless focus, on explicit instruction, specifically in those foundational skills, because those are the runway to comprehension. They are not the impediments to comprehension, as I had been told as I came up as a whole language teacher. They are the runway to comprehension. And from there, I worked for an organization called the Roland Reading Foundation. I was a letters facilitator, and I met Susan and David Hall during that time as well. I went on to work for an organization called the Highlights Education Group, which is part of the Highlights for Children family. Previous to coming here, I was at the Reading League as the Chief Innovation Officer to kind of help grow their national network of chapters, which I'm so excited to see has really taken off. But when I was offered this position, I really jumped at the chance because when I look back at all the threads of my career, from teacher to administrator to professional development leader, this all came together in this chief academic officer position. And I really wanted to think about this chapter of my career as a culmination of the understanding that, yes, teachers need professional learning and they need to understand these basic foundational principles, this ever evolving research base called the science of reading. And we have to make up for what they maybe didn't get in their teacher preparation program. But I also really believe firmly that we need to give teachers the right materials to actualize this learning. I have met so many teachers who have gone through letters or they've gone through professional learning opportunities and they've learned about this body of evidence called the science of reading, and they've had their own watershed moments like I had. And then they go back to their districts and they're given, leveled text and implicit phonics approaches. That to me is an existential crisis. It's not just an inconvenience. You can't unknow something. And so once you know this body of evidence, you have to be able to actualize it or enact it with your students. And so I really wanted to be part of not only helping teachers develop their expertise, but I wanted to empower them by giving them tools in which to enact that expertise.
And speaking about tools, you've now written a booklet.
Yes.
So talk to us about it. It's the Science of Reading 2.0?
Yeah, it's a Science of Reading 2.0. And the reason we called it that is because, and this is kind of where I am in my thinking right now, that we really have to be thinking about, what is that body of evidence, that research base, that science of reading? But from that, how are we moving from what I call the theoretical to the practical? Or how are we, I gave a talk last week and we talked about from metaphors to methods, right? Like we take a metaphor like Scarborough's reading robe, and how are we translating that into methodology? How are we giving teachers those teacher moves, that really actualize the science into practice? So this booklet that we have, Science of Reading 2.0, which I can provide a link to the ebook, focuses a lot on taking that body of evidence called the science of reading and actualizing it, and thinking about things like, what does the implementation science tell us? This is another body of research in addition to the body of research called the science of reading. Implementation science, there's actually an organization some of you might be familiar with. It's called NERN. It's the National Implementation Research Network. And when we look at kind of the research around implementation, there was also a wonderful book called A Blueprint for Authentic Engagement. And what they talk about is how whenever you're implementing something, you can either just let it happen, or you can help it happen, or you can make it happen. And when we think about things like adopting a resource, when teachers are given a new resource, we can just let it happen. We can just give them the teacher's guides and the books and say, have a go. We can help it happen by maybe giving them some training, to go along with that, or we can make it happen. And making it happen would be things like providing strategic coaching and examining data and helping teachers understand how to differentiate in tiers 1, tiers 2, and tiers 1, 2, and 3 of instruction, how to group kids according to diagnostic assessments. So those making it happen moves are really part of implementation science. And there was an interesting article published in IDA Perspectives about 6 years ago. And what they found is without an implementation team using, clearly defined implementation methodology, like I just talked about, making it happen, it takes 17 years to move half of the intended new initiative to routine practice. Whereas when you put in implementation, an implementation team with focused moves, it takes about 3 years to move 80% toward your implementation goals. So that's a huge impact. So when I think about the Science of Reading 2.0, it's about building our knowledge, certainly, our collective knowledge, continuing to delve into that ever-evolving dynamic body of evidence, if we're not aware of that, making sure we are, making sure we're collectively aware, but then also thinking about how does that actually translate to practice, and how does that translate to the day-to-day decisions a teacher makes about instruction, but also what materials are in her hands to make that happen. So
So,
that's just one of the things. Yeah.
well, you have a magic wand. I know someplace over there you got a magic wand, and if you could wave that, who who are the people you want to get 2.0 into their hands? Which
Yeah.
what kind of educators are they? Or what's their where are they? How are they? And how are you going to make that happen?
Well, thank you. Yeah, make it happen. Thank you for asking that. Actually, it's kind of a resource for everybody, because for those people who might be new to the science of reading, we have some front matter around what is the science of reading. What is Scarborough's rope, and how does it play out what skilled reading really means. Um, and then we talk about how do we translate principles of literacy instruction. So when I wrote that piece, what I put together was principles of explicit instruction from Structured Literacy and IDA, International Dyslexic Association, and Rosenshine's Principles of Instruction, which you might be familiar with, which are general principles of instruction. And then I put together with that Stanislaus Dehaan's How We Learn. So and implementation science. So if you mash all that together, just take kind of those four things and bring them all together, I've presented 10 principles of literacy instruction. So I think when we think about who's an audience for this, it's for someone who might be new to the science of reading, but it's also for someone who might need more in terms of the other pieces that contribute to the science of reading, like implementation science, and leaders. I am very committed to working with literacy leaders, and we've been doing a series of science of reading symposia around the country last year and this year, and targeting all educators, but literacy leaders in particular, to help empower literacy leaders to understand how important they are, and how their contributions and their leadership are incredibly important. So one of the things that we include in the Science of Reading 2.0 is what I'm calling, bold steps. How do we encourage our leaders to ask big questions and take bold leader moves? And, for example, one of the bold leader moves to me is, how do leaders themselves become part of the learning around the science of reading or the evidence aligned instruction? I don't think they can be bystanders. I think they have to actually be engaged in knowing what is the science of reading. Number two, I think another bold leader move is to really confront gaps in data. And that's different from looking at the data, right? Confront gaps in data, like really dig into your data. If you see any populations of your students, even if your average data looks pretty good for your school or district, dig in. And if there are any students who are significantly left behind from any sort of upward trajectory in your school, you have to confront that.
Well, I
And
don't know what a
yeah,
reading leader is. I'm kind of an idiot. I
yeah,
mean, is it a school superintendent? Is it a principal?
yeah, yeah,
Is it the reading facilitator? Is it the reading specialist? Is it hi? I just got my
yeah,
first year teaching kindergarten and first grade,
yeah,
and I'm mad as heck, and I'm going to do something about it. So what is a leader? And wait a minute, the other beautiful thing is, I remember we had a pandemic. Remember that a while ago, and that really was a shot in the arm for the science of reading movement, because everybody started
mhm,
realizing, wow, we are failing. We,
yeah,
everybody
yeah,
realized it. So I think there's a lot of people in positions of power, and they could be principals or school superintendent, board of education people,
yeah,
teachers, and saying, wait, we all, you said it. You have a watershed moment. All of a sudden, and you don't have to be shy about this, because this is new. This is information that's been around. It's been around for a while. It takes a while to come out of the lab,
mhm,
but it's being distilled all over the place. And this tool that you're giving us or getting to us, uh, it's the owner's manual of 2.0, right? So who's the leaders, and how do they get this book now?
Yes, thank you. So first of all, thank you for asking the question about leaders, because frankly, all of us are, right? We're that first year kindergarten teacher. We are a leader. And even though sometimes I hear from teachers, well, I don't have any control over what our district adopts or how our district spends our money. I totally understand that. I completely understand that. How do you advocate? How do you advocate from whatever position you're in, for those dollars to be spent wisely for our, one of the ways I've been talking to administrators who do hold the purse strings, so to speak, is what's your return on your investment? How are you protecting that return on your investment? But frankly, thank you for asking that. We are all leaders. We are all leaders in this. I don't think that any one person in this group of people that you just mentioned holds the magic wand, holds the key. I think it's all of us together working on this together. So when I say, for example, confronting gaps in data, yes, a building leader needs to do that, a district leader needs to do that, but an individual teacher too, needs to look at her whole classroom and think about, okay, what does this mean for my instruction? We talk about the fact that we have to, think about what I call an ecosystem of curriculum resources. One of the things that I think is very disturbing is when I go into a district and I see that they're using an incredible hodgepodge of resources. And that's really hard for a teacher to navigate all that and to put together this program with this program with this program with this program. That's, first of all, it's indicative of the school or district trying to patch, missing pieces. But secondly, it is incredibly time consuming for our teachers. And I want our teachers to have resources that allow them to have consistency between core and intervention, have very explicit teacher lessons laid out so that they can spend their time really focusing on the kids and their instruction with the students and student response. So I think it's really important that, we advocate for an ecosystem of resources that are aligned and coherent and have, consistent academic language. I was talking to a teacher recently, and we were just giving a really simple example. A student in Tier 1 instruction, the teacher might be referring to long vowel silent E as a pattern. But that same student maybe goes to a different teacher for intervention, and the intervention, perhaps the teacher is referring to it as magic E. The student doesn't necessarily know those are the same thing. So how are we providing an ecosystem approach where in all tiers of instruction, the language is the same, the routines are similar so that kids don't have to put their bandwidth into the routine, they can put their bandwidth into the learning? How do we make sure that the ecosystem has both evidence-aligned resources and methodology, but also evidence-based? And here's another bold leader move. When you look at resources, in particular, ask what's the evidence behind it? What's the efficacy behind it? Yes, it might align with the principles of the science of reading, but you also have efficacy research that shows that this program or these materials or this professional learning has made a difference in real classrooms with real teachers and real kids. So I encourage people to ask that question.
Well,
ask the question.
I live in a farm. I understand ecosystems here, but this literacy ecosystem,
Yeah.
You create it. How do you create it, and how do we know we're creating a good one? Because I think that you need different tools to help different kids. You guys, I personally, I have a love of teachers. I think you guys are like educational ninjas. Like, how's this kid coming at me? And you get ready for anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this literacy ecosystem, how and why and how is it created? And
Yeah, so I like to think of, I think a good framing, a way to frame it is to think about the instructional cycle, right? The instructional cycle begins with all students receiving high quality Tier 1 instruction, right? That's core instruction delivered to all students. From that, we use our universal screeners to identify those kids who are below benchmark. We also want to identify kids who are above benchmark, right? And make sure that they're provided with the right interventions as well. But let's talk about those students who are below. The students who are below benchmark, then we need to give them diagnostic assessments to pinpoint Where are the gaps? What are the needs? Where do we actually focus instruction so that they get interventions either at the tier 1 level or the tier 2 level that are targeted, focused, and designed to quickly accelerate them back into tier 1 instruction. Because what I've seen too often is that tier 1, we've got the tier 1, everybody's in tier 1, and then we do universal screeners. We identify those kids who are yellow or those kids who are red. But if we don't do a good diagnostic, sometimes in the past, at least, we had grouped those kids together and given them some interventions. But unless they're targeted and focused and based on diagnostics, those kids are going to continue in what I call the cul-de-sac of intervention, right? They're just going to keep spinning in that intervention space. So when we think about an ecosystem, it needs to have good universal screeners. It has to have pinpointed diagnostics so that we know exactly where to put that instruction. And then it has to have progress monitoring in the tier 2 and in the tier 3 realm, because progress monitoring is designed to show us as teachers if our instruction is working. Progress monitoring is not about the kids, it's about our instruction. And if the kids are not making progress, we don't just keep doing more of the same, right? We have to change our instruction. The other thing I have to say is when we think about an ecosystem is your tier 1 doing the job, right? If we're not meeting the needs of 80% of our kids in tier 1, we probably have a tier 1 problem. And you can't, I've heard many people say this, you cannot intervene your way out of a tier 1 problem. So an ecosystem needs to have tier 1, tier 2, 3 instruction and good resources, as well as assessments that help us drill down into, how are kids doing? Where do the kids need support? And how are we monitoring the progress for those kids who need that support? Across, and I kind of briefly mentioned this, across all those tiers of instruction, are we using consistent academic language with kids? Are we using consistent high impact routines? And let me give you an example. One routine that I believe is on its way out, which I think is the right move, is the routine of sustained silent reading, or drop everything and read. There really isn't any evidence that those are helpful. And we're losing valuable instructional time, So that's not a routine. That's not a highly replicable, highly scalable, highly reliant routine. So we also have to think about, how are we pulling weeds and planting flowers, right? Like, how are we getting rid of these non-replicable, non-scalable, non-reliable routines and making room for routines that are going to give us a higher impact, higher bang for our buck, higher return on our investment, and that have efficacy and evidence alignment? Those are the questions we have to ask ourselves.
Well, what I like about this is it's evidence based. So there once was this when you were a young teacher, and you're like, wait a minute, and you were told to do this, just do it, and maybe you're seeing the results aren't there, but now you have tier 1, tier 2, and you're seeing these kids, and you don't go through the cul-de-sac, as you were saying.
Yeah.
So this is I think is what's important that's happening now, and I don't know what's going to happen 10 years from now, 20 years from now in the universities, if the universities are going to finally catch up, because this is so mainstream. Everybody's talking about the science of reading right now. And when you talk about evidence-based information, it's something you can take a look at, and you can figure it out, and you can chart your kids. I mean, you said earlier that the teacher fails you. I remember teachers in fourth grade. I'm a big failure. Teachers would say, I'm going to have to fail you. I'm failing you. I mean, they say it right to your face.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, it depends. If you're dyslexic, you hear like, okay, well, you failed me. I mean, I guess I failed, or did you fail me? I don't know. Is it a learning disability or a teaching disability? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know where we
Yeah.
are. So we're in this world of this instruction, and so this again, it's in your book. It's talking about the evidence. It's explaining it, because like I'm on the board of education. I'm not on the board of education, but pretending I am. I'm on the board of education. I'm certainly, if I'm a principal, I should know this stuff, and I don't want to admit that I don't know this stuff, because I grew up in the world of balanced literacy, So I don't want to pretend I don't know this stuff. So
Yeah.
a tool where you can just get this, like our film, your book, any of these things where it's leveling the playing field. It's showing people, it's pulling the curtain back. Am I right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and thank you for making those points. I mean, I think, well, and one thing I want to really say too is that, I'm not here today to talk with you to say I have all the answers, that we have all the answers. As I mentioned before, education is a dynamic profession. And that's one of the beauties of it, right? We're always learning, we're always growing. Evidence is is dynamic when we think about the science of reading. So we don't have all the answers, but you know, we have more answers than we had when I started out as a teacher. And I think it's on us to really work toward common understanding. So I'll give you an example. I use the terms evidence aligned. I use term evidence aligned, meaning that the practice or the resource aligns with this body of evidence called the science of reading. I also use evidence based, meaning that the product, the resource has efficacy or evidence that shows that it works. And I think we really need both. And I think that we need to empower leaders and like you mentioned, school board members. I had the privilege of speaking at a state school board association conference recently, and they were hungry for this information and curious about this, because I think community members, like school boards and all community members, want to be able to ask the questions, to understand what's going on in this school, and to to be part of the solution. And many of the school board members at this particular conference were in districts that had quite dismal results, low graduation rates and low proficiency rates. And so they were hungry for this information as well. And so when you talk about who is a leader, there's another example, right? Our school boards and our parents and our communities, they're leaders in this as well. And I think in the education community want to partner with those leaders as well.
Well, how to be a leader is all you have to do is just take the lead, just get involved,
Yeah.
and if you are enabled to do it, and you know where the science is and it's broken down,
Mm-hmm.
and you have the evidence. So let me see if I got this
Yeah.
right. So
Yeah.
I got a bunch of friends who are neuroscientists, and they hang out, they kind of figure stuff out back in the lab. They do these tests and stuff. But now you're going into the classroom. So to implement the science, and then somebody's going to say, "Oh, there's a pendulum; it swings, it goes this and that happens," but it's not this. I want you to tell us about how long-term success works with implementing the science into the classroom. How do I know? Let's say you come to my school and you're somebody from 95% or something happens.
Yeah.
But what's going to happen next year when you guys are gone? What's going to happen?
Yeah. So that's a really important, when I go back to those, what I call bold leader moves. One of the bold leader moves is to plan for sustainability, because I have seen this over and over again where a district starts to really move the needle because they have a champion, and the champion is leading the charge. And, teachers are going through consistent and aligned professional learning, and they're getting good resources, and they're looking at data, all those pieces that we look toward for successful implementation. They're getting coaching, they're getting strategic coaching and data analysis, that type of thing. But sometimes when that champion leaves and a new person comes in who needs to bring in their own initiative, let's say, the whole thing can fall apart like a house of cards. And so I think we always have to be thinking about, and this is again very true of leaders, how are you building sustainability and building capacity so that this important initiative that's making a difference for kids doesn't fall apart when you leave or when you take a different position. So I think that's part of being a good leader. I wanted to say something else too. I was just in conversation with some people this morning, and we were talking about leadership. And one of the people I was talking to, Danielle Thompson, she said, there's a misconception that leadership is positional. Right? Leadership is not positional. Leadership is anyone who is going to be bold and be courageous.
I love Dr. Nell. Were you talking to her at 10 o'clock this morning?
Yeah.
I was supposed to talk to her at 10 o'clock. You kicked me off the phone call for that.
I don't know if it it was 10. I don't know if it was 10 o'clock, but it was at some point. Yeah. She and Terry Noland and I are going to be doing a webinar next week.
Oh, perfect.
Because I'm doing a series of webinars called Courageous Leaders. And so Terry and Nell are going to be my guests next week. And then a month of December, I have Mitchell Brookins. And then January, I have Louisa Moats. So it's just a series of discussions like you and I are having today to talk about what have they learned as courageous leaders and what are the principles of courageous leadership. So that's another link I could provide is just links to our webinar series designed to really elevate some of these principles and these thought leaders in this area.
So you're a leader if you share these links that you have, and I have a good friend of mine, Judge Karen Cole. She's briefly in the movie, and the thing is, she's a judge.
Oh, I remember her.
Right?
I remember her.
Yeah, so she's a judge, and so people are like, okay, you're a judge, but when you're going to school, I'm a mom. I'm a mom, and they're like, hey, lady, you might be a judge outside, but you're a mom here, and so she's brilliant, and she makes brownies and cookies and brings them to the teachers, as opposed to just coming in and yelling at people. And she can't put them in jail or anything in there, but she can give them brownies and cookies. So she's being kind, she's being nice. Well, so brownies and cookies, okay, maybe everybody can't eat brownies and cookies, but I also think in the age of information, like everybody has one of these things, and you can share those links. And if you're a first grade teacher and you're going to be a leader, and I don't control the school budget, but I can go to a board of education meeting, and I can say, hey, let's check out this link. Here's what these people are saying. Hey, do this in your time when you're home. Just check out these links. It's 10 minutes, it's 15 minutes, it's 45 minutes here and there. And guess what? You're, as a concerned citizen, as a parent, as a educator, as a leader, somebody who's bringing about positive change. I mean, now what's the problem? If we know better, do better, right? That's what Maya Angelou says.
Yes, exactly.
So now we know it. Now the genie is out of the bottle, man. So it's right there. And I'm not sure if you heard Kareem Weaver saying the other day that when he was talking about, hey, how many people were balanced literacy before? How many people started off on that? So, right. So it's evolution. It's revolution.
Yeah, revolution. Yeah. I'm part of a group of educators. We call ourselves the Peaceniks, and our fearless leader is Janine Herron, who's a neuropsychologist, and she is a courageous human being. And she always says it's a revolution. We're leading a revolution. So I just love that because it's really true. And we can all be part of it. We can all be part of the solution. You mentioned the judge bringing cookies and candies to the teachers. And, that's the other thing I like to think about is how are we leading with kindness, right? This isn't a war. This isn't a battle. It makes me crazy, when people, want to continue to kind of characterize it as a war. Yes, we have important work to do. We have urgent work to do. But how do we approach our work with kindness, especially our work with teachers who maybe were teachers like me, who were brought up under a different methodology, way of thinking? And how do we be kind so that people don't feel shame and don't feel blame and don't feel guilt, right? We're all just moving in the right direction. And you can't unknow something, right? You can't unknow something. So once we continue to learn, I think we have to then ask for help, support others, be kind, to try to really make this a revolution.
Well, I love the kindness part of it, and I worked with these decoding dyslexia parents who were just masterminds, and they would talk to me all the time like, we're going to just do positive pressure.
Yes.
And so you think about positive pressure, you think about kindness, and see, that's why this revolution. Okay, hey, name of our film is How to Win the Reading Wars. Hopeville, How to Win the Reading Wars. Hey, it sells, but there's been casualties. It's a war. Whether it became a revolution on it, the thing that I find most fascinating, and you said it before when you said teachers, you said she. There's male teachers,
Yeah,
and again, I was talking with
yeah.
Kareem Weaver. Where are the men, in the classrooms? But
Hmm.
I think when you're talking about positive pressure and kindness, I grew up with four sisters, and my mom was a woman too, and my wife, my daughter. It skipped a
Yeah, yeah.
generation. It skipped a generation with me, but I think that there really is the kindness aspect of it, and the revolution of, like, we have this information. What you see, you
Yeah.
can't unsee. We have it, and we have to spread it. So this is something. The science of reading. Why everybody's talking about it now is it's just every place because
Hmm.
it has the evidence. It has the
Right.
data. It has the data. There's no undenying that. So hold on.
Yeah.
This is one section I didn't put in the film, and I hope I don't ramble too much on it. I don't know if you remember, before the pandemic, there was a Second World War a long time ago, like back in the 40s. There was a thing called the Second World War,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so there was. I was just in Japan not too long ago, and everybody back in the Second World War, the Japanese and the Americans, they didn't like each other so much. And then there was this thing called the Imperial Japanese Army, and they said, okay, you guys, we got to leave the islands, but we're going to come back for you. And there were these
Hmm.
soldiers. So that was 1945. So there's the last Japanese soldier stopped fighting in 1970 something. They lived in the mountains.
Yeah.
They never got the report. Hey, there's evidence based. There's new science here. They
Yeah.
just they just
Right.
never got it, and
Yeah. Yeah.
they were just standing true to what they believed. So
Sure. Sure. Yeah.
I'm probably going to get in trouble for saying that. I mean, I'm sure I will. But anyhow, it
Yeah.
might have been a war of waking people up, of saying that there's things going on, like why Tommy can't read. You have him in the cul-de-sac, but Tommy gets socially promoted, and I don't want to see Tommy again. I don't want to see Harvey again. I'm getting him out of my grade, and guess what? And then the person who's running the high school, when Tommy or Harvey are juvenile delinquents because they're acting out, because, and that's what you said. That's how we started this conversation. Do we help out the the kindergartners, the first graders, or do we help out the high schools? We help out everybody.
Yeah, it's Ann. Yeah, I want to say this. I understand the frustration that comes with this kind of what is seemingly an endless, churn of you know make of kids not getting to 95, us not getting to 95%. I mean, I've been in education for a really long time, and so I understand the frustration. And I don't want to minimize the urgency by talking about kindness, but I think what I want us to think about is, or I shouldn't say us, what I try to think about is how are we positive, proactive, and problem solving, right? And let me give you an example. So another woman who's part of this group that we're calling ourselves the Peaceniks is Marianne Wolf, who is
Lover,
beloved by
lover.
beloved and a genius, brilliant.
Sure.
She recently did a keynote at the Teachers College Reading and Writing reunion. And, many people would think, here's Teachers College Reading and Writing Project, and here's, structured literacy, science of reading. Many people would think, oh, they're like dichotomously opposed. The point is, how are we building bridges? And so her speaking at this reunion in a very kind, inviting way, but also being courageous in saying that, listen, here's this neuroscience. I'm a neuroscientist. I know these things, she says. And she can bring forth this understanding of the neuroscience and how important those foundational skills are to building the neuroscience or building the neural pathways. So it's that, I think, that kind of common, that positive, proactive problem solving, but also being courageous, in ensuring that we are dealing with the best information we know how, so that we are empowering people, not disempowering people, but empowering people, and setting our educators up to be heroes to people like Harvey or whoever, whatever name, what other name to use, Johnny or whatever, who are going through school and who are struggling, and people think they're a juvenile delinquent. how are we empowering educators to be the heroes, for the Harveys and whomever is struggling, because every student like that does need a hero. I really believe that.
I'm 64 years old, and I am on Facebook, and the guys I went to high school with, the people I went to high school with, that's what people do. They talk on Facebook. Our science teacher, Mr. Weiss, who came to my 60th birthday party, he still hangs out with us, and he's just a great guy. And
Great.
he's the guy who recognized in the 70s, like, what's this dyslexia thing? But he knew,
Yeah.
and these were all the troublemaker kids that hung out together, but they liked science and they wanted to learn, and they had a desire for learning. It's just how do you unlock them to be that
Yes.
educational ninja? So
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you before we wrap up. You saw our film. What did you like about our film?
Well, I thought it was I thought what your film did, which I really appreciated a lot, is it helped to define the issues, but it also gave stories of hope, stories where they're making a difference. What I shared with you earlier, the emotional toll, the emotional story of the young man who was in prison, and how, he had a hero, and that hero taught him to read, and how read literacy literally saved his life. And I don't ever want us to forget that this is life and death, right? There's a life and death situation here. One of the people I was with last week in Wisconsin, Steve Dykstra, is a psychologist, and he talks about, the impact of literacy and illiteracy on our health, well-being, future, future hopes, and dreams for our lives. So I think that the film both helped identify the problem, but gave, hope through stories. Another person that again, she's part of our Peaceniks group, is Margie Gillis. And I love the fact that you amplified, her and the work that she's doing, the relentless and committed work that she's doing on behalf of teachers. So those stories of hope, I thought were really important. And then, of course, who were the real heroes? Those teachers, and what they were doing with those kids in the classroom, and that sense of urgency they had for all their students. And I always come back to that. At the end of the day, I've had a very long career in education. At the end of the day, I'm a teacher, and I want to do everything I can to help empower and elevate teachers. And I think that's one thing your story did quite well.
Well, teachers are heroes. You spend a year in a classroom, and you watch them, and then maybe it is a war. Then because they're struggling, and they gotta make the mission. They gotta get to the goal, and
Mm-hmm.
and that's to keep Tommy out of the cul-de-sac, going around and around and around. And
Yeah.
and I went to Waterbury because Margie Gillis said they're doing it right in Waterbury, Connecticut. And
Yeah.
when you said relentless, Dina, who does the education and works with those teachers, she has written on her wall. I'm sure they might have said it in the movie, relentless. And
Mm-hmm.
you just have to. What's my job? My job is to teach this kid how to read.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. And my job is to help her
right.
do her job, right? And we are, in the organization I work for, 95% group, we have a relentless focus on empowering teachers and fulfilling our mission that 95% or more of our students will learn to read and thrive. I have my own mission statement on my wall, and what I want is to contribute in the best way I can to ensuring that all children learn to read joyfully so that they can thrive as literate citizens of the 21st century. Because to me, leading a literate life is not just about being proficient in reading. It's also about the gifts and the joys of leading a literate life. I want that for my grandchildren. I want that for I want that for everybody's kids, everybody's grandkids, right? The joys of leading a literate life.
How does 95 help teachers? I mean, it's a basic question, but
Yeah, thanks. So we publish resources. So we publish teacher materials, and so that especially one of our kind of flagship products is called our Phonics Core program, And what's unique about that is it's a very explicit, systematic, effective program. And I say effective because we have efficacy studies. As I mentioned, I think that's really important, aligned with the science of reading principles. And it goes K through 5. And I think what I love about that is that we have a lot of phonics programs end at grade 3 or even 2. And we recognize the foundational skills are not consolidated, nor are they completed by grade 3. So going into 4th grade and 5th grade and teaching kids how to attack multisyllabic words or how to use morphological units to make sense of words. Those are things that are still considered part of this whole word study foundational skills sequence. So we offer, that's kind of one of our flagships. And then we align that to a tier 2 program called Phonics Lesson Library, which again, very effective. We have efficacy results and we can link to those research results. We invest a lot in third-party independent research to show that our materials work, because we don't want to just lob anything else out there into the marketplace. We want to make sure it's aligned, evidence aligned and evidence-based. And then we also have a tier 3 program called 95 RAP, which is highly effective, designed to be used with teachers in the most targeted, smallest groups of students who need the most support. And we have additional resources around comprehension and vocabulary. We recently acquired Tools for Reading, which has sound walls and kid lips and other great resources, a spellography program written by Louisa Moats. So we really want to put those really good materials in teachers' hands. And we also wrap all of it around with professional learning. And when we talked about implementation science and making it happen, our professional learning is both building knowledge, so foundational courses, but also product implementation. How do you use this resource? Like you purchase our phonics core program, here's how to use it. And then we're very committed to strategic coaching, to going into schools and working with teachers in the classroom to look at data, refine instructional methodology, problem solve with teachers. But we also include building leaders and district leaders in our coaching to make sure that they're part of this, of the solution, that they're taking those bold leader moves, that we talked about, understanding evidence-aligned instruction, confronting gaps in data, putting a district-wide plan in place, adopting an ecosystem, as we talked about, supporting their teachers with good professional learning and planning for sustainability, those 6 bold leader moves that are in our Science of Reading 2.0. How is our strategic coaching supporting the leaders as well?
That's great. That's great, Laura. What do we miss? What do we anything that we didn't? We talked about a lot of stuff here. We covered a lot of ground.
We did talk about a lot of stuff.
95 is a good group. I see you guys everywhere. You guys are.
Thanks.
And I just love what you guys do. I love the name.
Thank you.
And
yeah, thank you.
So
Thank
what else? What else? Last thoughts.
I just want to say, thank you for the work that you're doing to promote our shared mission, our shared promise. And I think that's one thing that I guess I would say is we're all in this together. And how do we support one another in whatever contributions we're making? Like I said, my personal mission statement is to contribute in the best way I can. So I guess I would say, let's all look to ourselves and think about what's the best way you can contribute to this. Is it as a community member? Is it as an educator? Is it as a decision maker at a district level? Whatever role you can play it, own it. We can get this job done.
Kimiana Burke says this literacy problem is one we can fix. So we can all fix it. We can all be a leader. We can all go talk to our neighbors. We can all say, how can we fix this? And if you look at it, you can figure out how to get involved, because there's evidence. There's science behind it. Well,
and we all have a stake in this. Like we all have a stake in the generations to come, and ensuring that our children have whatever they need to be able to thrive and to lead that literate life and be contributing citizens. Those are all really important things to remember. It's not about just getting from one grade to the next. It's the whole big picture, that we can contribute to.
Well, I'm just speaking about reading, and I'm just dusted off Frederick Douglass, The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass, and it's like, okay, we had this whole class of people we weren't teaching to read, And I mean,
Law, by
uh,
law. Yeah.
by law, I mean, even and it was interesting. I mean, women, different people, different skin tones, and all kinds of other stuff. So you really do. We have the history that we know how this has affected people. It seems that now that we know how to fix things, we have a moral obligation of what we have to do.
Hmm.
We have to make a difference. So I mean, I think it's everybody, and everybody can feel good. They can be a leader, and they can contribute to making America great again because we're just gonna read. We're gonna read our
Hmm.
way into greatness is what we're gonna do. Use our imagination and stuff like that. I
Yeah.
love that. All right,
Well, thank you. Thank you for being a leader in this too. Appreciate
we're all in
appreciate
this
it.
together. Thank you. Thank you for everything.